Information today, the Wall Street Journal, one of several outlets with the details, that at least 12 employees of the UN's Palestinian Refugee Agency were actual hardened terrorists. They were part of Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel. And they say about 10% of all of this agency's Gaza staff have ties to terrorists, these Islamist militant groups. They say 6 United Nations Relief and Work Agency workers were part of the wave of Palestinian militants who killed 1,200 people in the deadliest assault on Jews since the Holocaust, according to the intelligence dossier. 2 helped kidnap Israelis. 2 others were tracked to sites where scores of Israeli civilians were shot and killed. Others coordinated logistics for the assault, including procuring weapons. They say that around 1,200 of this organization, the UNRWA's roughly 12,000 employees in Gaza, have links to terrorists. For more on this, I want to bring in Batya Ungar Sargon. She's the opinion editor at NewsWeek and the author of Bad News: How Woke Media is Undermining Democracy. Batya, great to talk to you again.
Thank you so much for having me, Vince. It's always so great to join you. A real privilege. This
is an amazing story, Batya. So what we have is U.S. taxpayers, who are the single biggest funders of the United Nations. It turns out we were also funding a terror attack on Israel.
I mean, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around, right? Like the UN has a department for the Palestinians. By the way, it's the biggest department that they have. Okay, so look at how much is spent versus what they've achieved. It has actually had employees involved in participating in atrocities. So it's not just that the UN sits there in judgment of Israel while on the other side actually participating in genocidal acts against Israel. And it's not just that 12 people participated, but 10%, 1,200 people are actual terrorists who belong to this UN organization. It is so unbelievably deplorable. The thing is, Vince, is that, there was something about this that was kind of obvious, right? I mean, the UN, these UNRWA schools, those are where Gazans' children go to school. All of the schools are controlled by this UNRWA organization, this branch of the UN. There were always rockets hidden in these schools. They always treated these children like human shields. But if you pointed that out over the last 10 years, the left would call you racist. Because don't you know, it's racist to say that these people use humans as human shields. It's racist to point out that they all have terror ties. 50% of the people employed by UNRWA have family members in Hamas. I mean, a family member who's a terrorist, right? So you have to understand, like somebody like me, you pointed this stuff out and got called racist for pointing out the truth. Yes. And now finally, at least the mainstream media is admitting it.
So let me jump into some of these percentages because they really are important. So the Wall Street Journal says 23% of this UNRWA, UNRWA, 23% of its male employees had ties to Hamas. 23%. They say that's a higher percentage than the average of 15% for adult males in Gaza. In other words, the UN agency had a higher percentage connection to Hamas than men in Gaza do. That's insane. Yeah. What we're seeing. And so we were funding these terrorists. And to your point about schools, of just the 12 we know that were involved in the terror attack, 7 of them were primary school teachers or secondary school teachers, including 2 math teachers, 2 Arabic language teachers, and 1 primary school teacher. So there were people who were employed by schools, terrorists who were employed by schools, who were on the U.S. to UN payroll.
And just the gaslighting, Vince, the gaslighting that has gone on. As of weeks ago, you had people from UNRWA going on CNN and talking about the plight of the Palestinians and denying any ties to Hamas and denying that there are rockets in their schools and rockets here and there. Yeah. Meanwhile, of course, Hamas is stealing millions and millions of dollars in aid. It doesn't go to the Palestinian people. It goes straight into their coffers. Antonio Guterres, the head of the UN, that man sat there and for 2 months refused to condemn the October 7th attacks. And now we know that people on his payroll were actually involved in them. What is he going to do? Where's the shame? Where's the shame? It's just unbelievable. It is unbelievable. And by the way, Vince, as your listeners know, President Trump stopped that funding to UNRWA. He said, we're not funding these terrorists, right? And President Biden in 2021 came in, immediately put that back on the American taxpayer payroll.
I'm so glad you said that. I was remiss in not mentioning it earlier when I went over this story, but that is such a critical point. As in so many things, Donald Trump took the right tact and Joe Biden reversed it. And here you have the United States funding terror. It reminds me, in these international organizations, it always seems to be the same thing over and over. The characters are a little different, but we just keep being subjected to all sorts of betrayals. So the World Health Organization, similarly during the pandemic, we dump a ton of money in there, but because they are so compromised and corrupted by China, they tried to redirect our attention away from China at the beginning of the pandemic. And meanwhile, you had millions of people die due to that virus that whipped around the planet. And once again, an international organization that we are funding that very poorly served us and, in fact, led to the death of so many.
That is such a great parallel because it underscores how these international globalist organizations that lecture us and sneer at us and say, oh, Israel's committing a genocide or you're racist to point out where COVID came from, they lecture and sneer, and behind their backs on the other side, they're literally participating in terrorism and literally running cover for China, which killed millions and millions and millions of Americans with this pandemic, right? And that is what you see again and again, whether it's the climate agenda or the defund the police or the let's take Israel to court for genocide. All of this stuff is class warfare against normal people who understand exactly what is happening. These people think that they're so much better than us because they have these fancy degrees, and they lecture us and they collect money, and then they make life uninhabitable and unlivable, and they commit terrorist acts. They run cover for China over COVID. They make fuel unaffordable for the working class. That is what is at the beating heart of all of these stories, as you rightly point out, Vince.
Do you think, Batya Ungar Sargon, and again, thank you as always for joining us, do you think that there's going to be a sea change on all of this? Do you think people are opening their eyes to the corruption of these organizations and how they're actively working to not just thwart us, but to hurt us in so many ways?
100%. You're seeing across Europe farmers standing up to the climate change crazies, all of the overreach. Of course, here we have the working class is very aware of this. And I think increasingly, because you have working class Americans of all races joining together to say no more to both parties, by the way, which both parties hate them, for sure, you're seeing like really people waking up to this stuff, waking up to the hypocrisy, and they're not going to take it anymore. I mean, they're just not going to take it anymore.
I hope so. I mean, because the lies have become so cartoonishly brazen at this point. If you still believe them, you are not awake at all. I mean, the idea that the economy is in great shape thanks to Joe Biden when everything is more expensive than when he became president and people are losing their full-time jobs and replacing them with multiple part-time jobs to make ends meet. It's over. Like the lies need to end. The idea that Biden has, if he could secure the border, if only he has more power, it's just the most outrageous possible lies they could possibly project to you, and yet they keep doing it. And God willing, you're right. I hope people wake up to this, and it's not just European farmers.
Yeah, I think that there is a real realignment here happening. The emptiness, the bankruptcy of the quote unquote expert class, whether it's the economics expert class or the foreign policy expert class, Trump really revealed how intellectually and morally bankrupt all of these organizations were, which is, of course, why they have to destroy him. But in that sense, he really revealed that to be working class in America today is to be second class. And that is utterly unacceptable. We have broken the contract with the working class in America. And any politician who realizes that and recognizes that is going to go really far.
Yeah, but then again, we get like phony baloney lawmakers who pretend that they're for the working class. I'm for the working class. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is a perfect example of this. She claims to be for the little guy, except it seems like she's constantly defending these corrupt globalist regimes. She just tweeted, this morning, she tweeted that this UN organization that turned out just to be a terror cell, that we should keep funding it. She says, cutting off support to the UNRWA, the primary source of humanitarian aid to 2 million plus Gazans, is unacceptable. Among an organization of 13,000 UN aid workers, risking the starvation of millions over grave allegations of 12 is indefensible. The U.S. should restore aid immediately. Do you get the sense that she knows how stupid this is, or how as you point out, globalist this is?
I mean, somebody should really run a campaign and ad against her that says, you know, AOC, defund the police, fund the terrorists, right? I mean, that's literally what she stands for, right?
Yes.
Make working class life uninhabitable and unlivable here, and, you know, side with the terrorists against Israel. I want to tell your listeners a little bit about the timeline here. So Israel was taken to court in The Hague, the ICJ, the International Criminal Justice Court, over accusations that it is committing genocide by trying to prevent the mass rape and mass murder and dismemberment of its women and children. Now, what happened was, amazingly, the court sided against South Africa, which brought this court case. It said Israel, there is not yet evidence that Israel is committing genocide, which was utterly shocking, Vince, right, given what we're all talking about these globalist organizations. So Israel won, but of course they couldn't admit defeat. But AOC then was asked about this on a news station. She was asked, is Israel committing genocide? And she said she couldn't say yes it is, because she is all in with Joe Biden. She's supporting Joe Biden for president. She's standing behind him. So the left went crazy because she said, well, I know a lot of young people think that it's committing genocide. The left was then at her throats, and she felt the need to, you know, restore their faith in her, that she really hates Israel. And so she woke up and decided to tweet about this, but she had not yet read, obviously, the Wall Street Journal finding that it was not 12 UNRWA members who participated in October 7th, which I have to say, 12 should be enough to defund the organization. But anyway,
sure.
Okay, she says it's not enough. But it was actually, like you said, a quarter of the men, school children, a school teacher who was close enough to one of the kidnapped women to take a photo of her, a principal who had hostages in his home, school teachers procuring weapons for Hamas. For God's sake, she needs to apologize for this. Of course, she will never back down. But that tells you a lot about her. She doesn't have any actual real values. She's reading the room. She realized that she upset the left, and she had to quickly say something super anti-Israel. And so she jumped on this. And to me, that is the timeline here. And it just reveals how she's just sort of has no real values when it comes to this.
So,
will say anything for the base.
What is that, though? What does that come from? Why do you have lawmakers like AOC who can't even spare a moment in their day to talk about issues that are affecting Americans, yet they're obsessed with advancing causes that hurt Israel? What is that about?
I think that's such a great question. You saw that a lot with Ukraine as well. American politicians showing up with the Ukrainian flag on their lapels as if that's, the 51st state or what have you. Ukraine is a deeply corrupt country. It will never be a member of NATO. It doesn't bring anything to the table in terms of allyship. It's the exact opposite of Israel, which is a country that's totally pulling its weight in terms of helping us, in the Middle East, literally fighting our enemies for them, right? For us, fighting Iran's proxies for us, losing, hundreds and hundreds of young people who have their whole lives ahead of them to fight our enemies, right? I mean, that is a totally different situation. But you have here, well, exactly, you're totally right. They are obsessed with hating on Israel because it is the biggest virtue signal. It allows them to posture, with this vanity they bring to everything, like we were saying, these globalists who like to sneer at you. And by the way, Vince, they don't actually want to change hearts and minds, right? The left doesn't want Americans to actually change their minds and start siding with the Palestinians. You know how I know that? Because what they do to try to get their point across is to make life unlivable for the working class. They block roads for people trying to get to work or get home or feed their families. They scream at people. They ruin Christmas, right? Like, they are actually not trying to convince anyone.
Yeah, and finally, on that front, what you're talking about, the left is trying to now distance themselves a bit from these crazies, and they're saying that actually this is yet another Russian meddling hoax. This is Nancy Pelosi. I swear to you, this is real audio on CNN this weekend, suggesting that all of these anti-Israel lunatics would keep interrupting Biden's speeches, and even actually screamed at Nancy Pelosi today in front of her house in San Francisco. Here's how she described it.
You think some of these protests are Russian plants?
I think they're plants. I think some financing should be investigated. And I want to ask the FBI to investigate that.
You see that the AOC sounding Democrats all around her are actually paid for by the Russians.
I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. Russia and Israel have had historically a very good relationship. You know, it's complicated now because Russia has been, sidelined and pushed into the arms of China. It's China and TikTok, which is basically an arm of the Chinese Communist Party, that is full of anti-Semitic hate. It's full of anti-Israel messaging because China is trying to destroy us, and so they're using our ally to do it. They're trying to undermine the cohesion of American society by making people hate Jews. But at the end of the day, by the way, these people aren't being paid by TikTok. They're being brainwashed by TikTok. It's a very different situation. It's definitely not Russia, and it's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, I just love the timeline that we've ended up in where Pelosi is basically accusing AOC of being a Putin puppet now. So it's everything's going great. Batya Ungar Sargon over at NewsWeek. Appreciate your time today, as always.